Welcome to Sinister Stories, where the shadows move, the rules matter, and what you don't see is sometimes the scariest part. If you love a good scare, stick around, because once you hear these stories, you'll never sleep the same way again. Subscribe, if you dare. I'll be honest with you. I took this job at the IKEA warehouse for two reasons: decent pay and the 15% employee discount. You ever tried to buy a couch from IKEA? Feels like you need to sell a kidney just to afford a footrest. But hey, work is work, and I figured stacking flat-pack furniture all night couldn't be that bad. Boy, was I wrong. I started on a Monday night. The manager, a guy named Paul, looked like he survived 5 divorces and drank his coffee straight from the pot. He barely made eye contact as he handed me a neon yellow vest and an old laminated paper. This is your rule sheet. Read it. Follow it. No exceptions. Now, you hear something like that on your first day, you're thinking, oh great, corporate nonsense, safety guidelines, don't trip over a pallet, blah blah blah. But then I started reading. If you see a customer wandering the aisles, do not approach. They are not real. Do not follow any arrows that were not there before your shift started. If you hear knocking from inside a box, do not open it. At 3:12 a.m. exactly, take a 10-minute break. No more, no less. If you hear someone whisper your name, no you didn't. I laughed. Out loud. Thought it was some inside joke for new hires. But Paul didn't laugh. He just took a deep sip of his coffee and said, "You'll see." My shift started easy enough. Moving massive boxes, organizing shelves, occasionally making a forklift beep like I was 5 years old. I worked alongside 2 other guys, Devin, a dude built like a fridge who used to play college football, and Luis, a short, stocky guy with a mustache that screamed dad vibes. We were having a great time making fun of IKEA furniture names. Who the hell names a chair flared full? I asked. Devin chuckled. Sounds like the noise you make when you stub your toe. Then Luis pointed at a shelf label. Look at this one. Björksta. We lost it. We were dying, practically crying over the dumb names. Everything was going fine, until around 2:30 a.m. I was restocking the lighting section when I noticed something weird. The arrows on the ground, the ones that guide customers through the store. One of them was pointing the wrong way. At first, I thought maybe maintenance messed up, so I called out, "Hey, you guys mess with the arrows?" Silence. Then, from behind me, a voice whispered, "Rob." I turned so fast I almost gave myself whiplash. Nobody was there. I swallowed hard, trying to laugh it off. Haha, very funny guys. But Devin and Luis were at the other end of the warehouse, arguing over whether or not IKEA meatballs were actually beef. I glanced back at the arrow. It had changed direction again. At 3:05 a.m. I heard something else. Knocking. I was near the furniture storage section, and one of the massive cardboard boxes, big enough to fit a whole couch, was knocking from the inside. I froze. Thump. 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 I backed up, hands in the air like I was surrendering. Nope. Nope. Not dealing with that. Luis walked over looking concerned. What's up? I pointed at the box. Something's in there, man. He frowned, walked up, and, before I could stop him, knocked back. Silence. Then the knocking came from a different box. We both stepped away so fast you'd think we were in a cartoon. Devin jogged over. What's going on? Luis pointed. Something's moving in the boxes, man. Devin, ever the skeptic, walked over to the nearest one and put his hand on it. He was about to open it when Paul's voice boomed from across the warehouse. Step away from the box. We turned. Paul was standing by the employee entrance, face pale, gripping his coffee like it was a stress ball. We did as we were told. The knocking stopped. Paul sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, then muttered, "Never touch the boxes. Take your 10-minute break." I glanced at the clock. 3:12 a.m. The breakroom was a mess. Cheap folding chairs, an old vending machine that only stocked off-brand soda, and a microwave that smelled like death. We sat down, all of us shaken. "You guys saw that, right?" I asked. Luis nodded. "Yup." Devin crossed his arms. "Could have been a rat." "A rat?" I scoffed. "That box was the size of a car." "What, we got were rats now?" Devin shrugged. "I don't know, man. This place is weird." Paul walked in, looking like he had aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes. He sat down across from us and rubbed his temples. "Listen," he said. "I know you've got questions, but here's the deal. Just follow the rules. You don't want to know what happens if you don't." I frowned. "So you're saying the boxes are... what? Haunted?" Paul didn't answer. Instead, he just looked at the clock. 3:22 a.m. He stood up. "Break's over. Get back to work." None of us moved right away, because outside the break room window, one of the warehouse aisles had shifted. The shelves had moved. And in the distance between the rows of furniture, I swear I saw something watching us. Something tall. Something that didn't belong. I wanted to believe I was just tired. Maybe the fluorescent lights were messing with my eyes. But the aisle had definitely moved. I leaned toward Luis. "Tell me I'm not crazy." Luis, still staring out the break room window, whispered, "If you're crazy, then we both are." Devin, ever the skeptic, squinted. "Looks normal to me." Paul shot him a sharp look. "Then go walk down that aisle." Devin hesitated. "Exactly." Paul sighed, rubbing his temples again like a man who had long given up on sleep. "Look, I don't have time to explain everything to you. Just don't wander from your section. Stay where you're assigned. If the aisles move, pretend they didn't. And whatever you do," he pointed at me, Luis and Devin one by one, "do not go near the showroom." I frowned. "What's in the showroom?" Paul gave me the kind of look you give a toddler when they try to touch a hot stove. "Just don't." Then he got up and left. That should have been the end of it. We should have gone back to work, ignored the weirdness, and finished our shift. But then, at exactly 3:45 a.m., the power cut out. Everything went black. You ever been inside an IKEA warehouse at night? It's already eerie with the lights on. But in complete darkness, it's a nightmare. The emergency lights flickered on after a few seconds, bathing the warehouse in a weak red glow. I reached for my phone, but before I could even turn on the flashlight, I heard something. Not just me. All three of us froze at the same time. It was faint at first. A soft, skittering noise, like something moving just beyond the edge of the emergency lights. Then, a whisper. "Rob." I turned so fast I almost knocked over a chair. "Okay. Nope. Not playing this game." Devin, despite his skepticism, was suddenly standing a whole lot closer to us. "Did you hear that?" Luis swallowed hard. "Yeah." It came again. "Rob, come here." From the aisles, the ones that had moved. I clenched my fists. "Not funny, guys." Luis shook his head violently. "That ain't us, man." And then we saw it. At the far end of the warehouse, just outside the glow of the red emergency lights, something was standing in the aisle. I say standing, but that's not quite right. It was too tall, its limbs too thin, like someone had stretched a human body in Photoshop, but left the head the same size. And it was staring right at us. Devin whispered, "What the hell is that?" Luis reached for his box cutter. "I don't think a blade's gonna do much against whatever that is." The thing tilted its head, like a confused dog. Then it took a step forward. I grabbed Devin's arm. "We are not sticking around to find out what it wants." We bolted. We ran past rows of flat-packed furniture, dodging pallets and towering shelves. The emergency lights flickered, casting weird shadows across the floor. I thought we were heading toward the exit, until we turned a corner and ended up in an aisle that wasn't supposed to be there. IKEA warehouses are organized. You can't just end up in a random place by accident. But this aisle? I had never seen it before. The shelves were too high. The ceiling was gone, replaced by an inky void. And instead of furniture, the racks were stacked with wooden mannequins. Hundreds of them. And every single one was facing us. Luis let out a shaky breath. We took a wrong turn. Devin muttered. There is no wrong turn in IKEA. It's a loop. I swallowed hard. Then why does this place feel like it wants to eat us? Then, from behind us, a crash. Something had knocked over a shelf. The thing from before? It was closer now. We needed a way out, fast. Luis grabbed my shoulder. The arrows. I looked down. Sure enough, the IKEA directional arrows were still on the floor, but they weren't the ones I remembered from earlier. These were old, faded, and they pointed straight ahead, toward the mannequins. We had two options. Run back, toward the thing that was chasing us. Follow the arrows through the aisle of mannequins. We made the worst choice imaginable. We ran into the aisle, and the second we did, the mannequins turned their heads toward us. Not all at once. First, a few. Then more. Then all of them. Their wooden eyes were hollow, their carved mouths frozen in something that almost looked like a grin. And then, they moved. Not like statues tipping over, like they were alive. We didn't have time to scream. We just ran. The aisle stretched longer than it should have. The mannequins closed in, their joints creaking, their arms reaching. I could hear Devin cursing under his breath, Luis breathing hard, my own heart hammering. And then, the aisle ended. We burst through the last set of shelves and found ourselves back in the break room, like we had never left. The emergency lights were still on. Our chairs were still there, the vending machine buzzing softly like nothing had happened. Paul was standing by the door. He looked at us, looked at the warehouse, then muttered, I told you not to wander. I turned around. The aisle we had just run through? Gone. Replaced by the normal warehouse layout. Devin sat down heavily, wiping sweat from his face. I need to go home. Paul shook his head. You clock out at 6 a.m. That's the rule. I stared at him. Paul, we just got chased through a hell aisle of haunted mannequins. Something is in here. Paul just sighed. Yeah, and it's only 4 a.m. He glanced at the clock, then back at us. Things get worse around 5. Paul's words sat in my brain like a rock. Things get worse around 5. Worse than mannequins turning their heads? Worse than whatever was stalking us in the aisles? I didn't want to know. But I was about to find out. We spent the next half hour pretending everything was normal. Devin and I stacked shelves in silence. Luis wiped down counters that didn't need cleaning. Every so often, one of us would glance toward the aisles, making sure nothing moved. Paul paced near the office, arms crossed, eyes darting toward the clock every few minutes. When 4:50 a.m. hit, he grabbed a clipboard and walked straight toward us. All right, he said. When the clock strikes 5, I don't care what you're doing. You stop. Get to the break room. No exceptions. I frowned. Why? Paul took a deep breath. Because that's when they come out. Devin snorted. Who's they? Paul's face darkened. Hope you don't find out. I checked the time. 4:57 a.m. Luis cleared his throat. So, how close do we cut this? Paul checked his watch. We move now. We all started toward the break room. My legs felt sluggish, like I was walking through water. I glanced back once, just once, toward the aisles. And I swear to God, I saw someone standing at the far end. Not something. Someone. A person. Dressed in IKEA blue and yellow. I stopped walking. Wait. Paul turned. What? I pointed. Who's that? Paul's face went pale. Then he grabbed my wrist and dragged me into the break room. The door slammed shut. Paul locked it. Devin and Luis were already inside, both looking shaken. I pressed against the window, heart hammering. Paul, what the hell was that? Paul exhaled slowly. Did it look human? I hesitated. I mean, yeah. Paul rubbed his face. Then it wasn't. I wanted to argue. Tell him that was bullshit. That I knew what I saw. But the look in his eyes stopped me. Luis was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. How long do we stay in here? Paul checked his watch. Till 5:30. Devin groaned. We're just supposed to sit here for half an hour while... whatever that was roams around? Paul nodded. Better than being out there with them. I swallowed. What happens if someone doesn't make it back in time? Paul was quiet for a long time. Then he said, then they don't make it back at all. At first, it was silent. Then the whispers started. Soft at first, like a breeze sneaking through the cracks in the walls. Then they got closer. They didn't sound like one person. They sounded like hundreds, whispering, murmuring. A sea of voices just beyond the door. Let us in. We forgot our shift. Rob, open up. I backed away from the door so fast I nearly tripped. That's not real, Devin muttered, squeezing his eyes shut. That's not real. Luis looked at Paul. It's them, isn't it? Paul nodded. Don't answer. Don't respond. Don't even look at the door. I clenched my jaw. Easier said than done. Because as the whispers grew louder, they started mimicking us. At first, it was general words. Break's over. Where's the pallet jack? Then they started saying our names. Luis. Devin. Rob. I felt my stomach drop. Then clear as day, I heard my own voice from the other side of the door. Guys, let me in. 5 minutes left. That's when the knocking started. Soft at first. Tap, tap, tap. Then harder. Bang, bang, bang. I was sitting on the couch now, arms crossed, trying not to breathe too loudly. The clock on the wall ticked like a time bomb. Devin sat next to me, whispering under his breath. Not real, not real, not real. Then, the handle jiggled. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Paul stood up fast. Nobody moves. We all froze. The door creaked. My heart was pounding. Then, silence. At exactly 5:30, Paul stood up, walked to the door, and unlocked it. Luis grabbed his arm. Dude, are you nuts? Paul looked at him. It's over. I swallowed. You sure? Paul didn't answer. Instead, he opened the door. The warehouse was normal. Bright overhead lights. No whispers. No figures in the aisles. Just IKEA. Paul exhaled. Back to work. I stared at him. You can't be serious. He was, and like an idiot I followed. I should have quit right then and there, but I didn't. And that's why I saw what happened next. Because one of us didn't leave that break room the same way they came in. We stepped out of the break room like survivors crawling out of a bunker after a nuclear blast. The warehouse looked normal. No whispers, no shadows, no mannequin aisles that didn't exist 5 minutes ago. Just rows of furniture, pallets stacked high, and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. But something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Then I noticed Luis wasn't talking. If you knew Luis, you'd know that was weird. The guy was always making jokes, always cracking wise about how we were basically IKEA janitors, but fancier. But now, he was just standing there, stiff. Too stiff. Like a store mannequin that had just been placed in the warehouse. Devin nudged him. Yo, dude, you good? Luis turned his head a little too slowly. Then he grinned. Yeah, man, he said. I'm good. Except... That wasn't Luis's voice. It was close, but just off enough to make my stomach twist. A little too smooth. A little too... hollow. I felt my throat go dry. Paul stared at Luis. Then he sighed. Not again. I took a step back. What do you mean, not again? Paul didn't answer. He just rubbed his temples. Devin was still staring at Luis, frowning. Dude, you sound weird. Luis, or whatever the hell was in Luis's body, tilted his head like a curious dog. Nah, man. It's just your ears playing tricks on you. He was smiling too wide, too many teeth. Something inside me screamed to run. Paul must have felt the same way because he suddenly grabbed my wrist and started walking fast. "Come on, we need to keep moving." I yanked my arm back. "Paul, what's going on?" Paul didn't look at me. Instead, he kept his eyes locked on Luis. Luis smiled. "Yeah, guys, what's the rush?" He took a step forward. That's when Paul pulled out a box cutter, and Luis stopped smiling. Nobody moved. Luis, or whatever was wearing Luis's skin, just stood there, watching us. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. His shadow. It wasn't right. The emergency lights were still on, meaning our shadows stretched long behind us. But Luis's shadow. It was moving the wrong way, twitching, shaking. Then it did something I will never forget. It stood up. Luis's shadow peeled itself off the floor, stretched its limbs, and crawled up the wall behind him like a spider. I took 3 steps back. "Oh, hell no!" Paul stepped forward, box cutter in hand. "You're not Luis." Luis grinned wider. "Maybe I was." Then he lunged. Paul moved fast. Faster than I expected for a guy who looked like he lived off caffeine and regret. He shoved Luis back and slashed at his arm with the box cutter. The blade should have cut him. Instead, Luis's skin split like fabric. No blood, no muscle, just empty darkness beneath, like his body was just a suit. I turned and bolted. Devin was right beside me, breathing hard. "Where the hell are we running?" Paul shouted from behind us. "Breakroom, get the salt." "The what?" I yelled. "The salt." Devin cursed under his breath, but neither of us argued. We raced back to the breakroom, skidding around corners, nearly knocking over an entire shelf of unassembled bookshelves. Behind us, I could hear footsteps, but they weren't running. Luis was walking, calmly, like he had all the time in the world. We burst into the breakroom, slamming the door shut behind us. Paul lunged for a metal cabinet, yanking it open. Inside were some basic supplies: Band-Aids, painkillers, duct tape, and a giant container of salt. I stared. Why the hell do we have salt? Paul grabbed a handful and threw it at the door. The second it hit the floor, the whispers started again. From the other side of the door, Luis's voice called out, "Come on, guys, open up, it's just me." Devin, still panting, grabbed his head. "This is insane." Paul dumped more salt along the bottom of the door. "Salt keeps them out." I exhaled. "Keeps who out?" Paul didn't answer right away. He just stared at the door. Then he muttered, "The ones who don't leave at 5:30. The whispers outside the door didn't stop, but Luis's voice changed. It multiplied. Now it wasn't just his voice. It was others. Dozens. Some laughing, some crying, some begging. Then, clear as day, one voice rang through. "Help me!" I stiffened, because that wasn't just anyone's voice. That was Luis's real voice, and he sounded terrified. I looked at Paul. "He's still in there." Paul clenched his jaw. "Yeah," he said. "That's the problem." The voices outside the door didn't stop. They layered over each other, a tangled mess of whispers and laughter and sobbing, pressing against the thin wood like an invisible crowd. And then, clear as day, Luis's real voice rang out again. "Rob! Devin! I'm still here! Please! Don't leave me!" I felt my stomach drop. Paul shook his head. "It's not him." I clenched my fists. "How do you know?" Paul's expression darkened. "Because they always say that." The thing wearing Luis's body was still standing outside. We hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard it walk away. It was just waiting, like it knew we'd have to come out eventually. Paul grabbed more salt, dumping it along the windowsill, muttering something under his breath. Devin looked at him. "How long do we wait this out?" Paul didn't answer right away. Instead, he checked his watch. Then he sighed. "Shift ends at 6. I blinked. "That's it? We just... wait?" Paul nodded. The moment the intercom plays the end of shift announcement, they disappear. Warehouse goes back to normal. I rubbed my face. And Luis? Paul didn't look at me. I understood what that meant. The clock on the wall ticked like a slow-motion heartbeat. Devin stood by the window, staring out into the warehouse. I don't see him anymore. I swallowed. The fake one? No, the real one. Paul shook his head. You won't. The whispers outside the door had faded, replaced by an eerie silence. 5:57 a.m. My hands were clammy. I kept my eyes on the second hand of the clock, waiting. 5:58 a.m. Devin exhaled. Almost there. Paul tensed. 2 minutes is still enough time for something to go wrong. I stared at the door. Outside, the warehouse was dead silent. I wasn't sure which was worse, the whispers or the silence. 5:59 a.m. Then in the distance, a single knock. I stiffened. Another knock. Closer, this time. Then, please, help me. Luis's voice, right on the other side of the door. I grabbed the handle. Paul slapped my hand away. I snapped. Paul, what if it's really him? Paul stared at me, face unreadable. It doesn't matter. 6 a.m. The intercom chimed. A cheerful robotic voice rang out. Attention all employees, the night shift has ended. Thank you for your hard work. Please exit the warehouse and clock out. For a few seconds, we didn't move. Then, Paul unlocked the door. The warehouse was normal again. The eerie lighting, gone. The wrong way aisles, back to normal. The whispers, silent. No sign of Luis, no sign of the thing pretending to be him. Paul sighed, running a hand down his face. Clock out. Go home. I grabbed his arm. Where's Luis? Paul looked me dead in the eye. Then he said, which one? I felt my blood turn cold. Devin didn't say a word. He just walked straight to the lockers, grabbed his bag, and left. Paul followed. I stayed behind for a few seconds, staring at the warehouse. Somewhere out there, maybe in some twisted, impossible aisle that only existed at night, Luis was still trapped. Maybe he was dead. Maybe he had become something else. Maybe, just maybe, he was still whispering for help. I quit that night. Paul didn't try to stop me. As I left, I glanced back one last time, just to make sure nothing was watching me. And for the briefest moment, I swear I saw a smiling face in the dark, right where Luis used to be.